Why is there something rather than nothing? And why is that something, the universe and all of its contents, always moving and changing? See, we can explain how specific actions are caused, and therefore, in a narrow, limited way, we can explain how specific items change and how things are made. But how can we explain the whole chain of causal events throughout all of time and space? Ultimately, the solution, we must conclude, is that there is a necessary force of existence, of being, behind it all, behind that entire chain, transcending space and time. The origin of this chain of causal events which fits this description matches the definition of the one God as explained by the preeminent thinkers of the Catholic Church in their articulation of classical theism. For the great Greek philosopher Aristotle, the ultimate explanation for motion and change was the, quote, unmoved mover, or the prime mover, a being that causes motion in others, but it is itself unmoved. This concept predates the more developed view of God described in classical theism. Just imagine how your life came about, how life in general came about on Earth, and how the universe came about. You might say there was something before that. But what was its cause? And what about the event before that? What was its cause? And so on and so on. If the series of events goes back forever, an infinite number of events, then how can we ever have arrived at the event that is your life? Well, here you are. As Aristotle explains in Metaphysics Book 12, quote, there must be an immortal, unchanging being, ultimately responsible for all wholeness and order. For Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BC, the existence of change and motion demands a final explanation that does not itself change. This being, the quote, unmoved mover, exists necessarily, not coincidentally or by chance, but as the first principle of being, the grounding of all that moves, changes, and becomes. This insight laid the foundation for centuries of theological reflection, culminating in the classical theistic conception of God. The God of classical theism is not defined as the greatest being among other lesser beings in the universe. He is instead described as the fullness of beingness itself, an eternal and unfragmented act of being, an uncaused cause that everything else is contingent or reliant upon. The pure and undivided essence of God, what he is, and the timeless existence of God, that he is, are both necessarily indistinguishable from one another. God's essence is to exist. This serves as the indispensable basis for that chain of causal events we see throughout the universe. The renowned Italian theologian St. Thomas Aquinas, who lived from 1225 to 1274 AD, speaks about this in his writing On Being and Essence. St. Thomas wrote that, quote, in God, essence and existence are the same. This means that God does not receive being like other things do. He is being itself. Everything else is a composition of essence and existence, what a thing is and that it is. But only in God are these one and the same. He is not just another being, he is being itself subsisting, or what St. Thomas in Latin calls ipsum esse subsistens. Without this fundamental distinction, the chain of causes collapses into an infinite regress with no grounding reality. St. Thomas Aquinas, building upon Aristotle's framework, makes a powerful case in the Summa Theologiae for the necessity of an uncaused cause. Quote, it is necessary to arrive at a first mover, put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God. St. Thomas, known as the Angelic Doctor, argues that a chain of causes cannot regress infinitely. It must ultimately be grounded in a first cause that exists by its very nature. For St. Thomas, this is not merely a logical abstraction, but the metaphysical reality we call God, whose essence is existence itself. That's the most logical philosophical conclusion for that chain of causal events we see throughout the universe. The essence of every other thing aside from God, receives existence distinctly as part of that observable chain of causal events. God is the foundation for the chain. If this were not the case, none of those other things aside from God could presently exist, since they would be endlessly derivative, meaning the causal chain would stretch back infinitely. If the causal chain stretched back infinitely, our eyes would never see the presently observable link in the chain. In addition to this chain of contingent causes for motion and change that we physically observe in the universe, we can think about the necessity of God in terms of our experience of time. If time was infinitely long, going back an endless amount of years into the past, always existing without an uncaused cause, then how did we ever arrive at the present moment? If the past were truly infinite, then an infinite amount of time would need to pass in order to reach today. But here we are. It is today. We have arrived at the present moment, and that means the past is not infinite. Time, therefore, must have had a beginning. And if time began at some point, then there needs to be a cause to explain why it started, something outside of time that brought this temporal universe into existence. By necessity, that timeless explanation is an uncaused cause, fitting perfectly with the description of God as defined by classical theism. Time is not something that can reach back infinitely into the past. Existence is not something that can be endlessly received. Therefore, you need some reality for whom it can be said that existence is unreceived in every respect, and time is not binding. This is the truth for whose essence is existence itself. This is the God of classical theism, and it is also the God of the Bible and the God of the Catholic Church, who described himself in this way. God said to Moses, I am who I am. Exodus 3:14. Likewise, in John chapter 8, verse 58, Jesus said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am.